Well, good morning, Nancy. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here as well. And in fact, there are two Nancys. As you can see, there's one at the front. Yeah. There's you, who I assume was born in the States, and then there's this one who allegedly comes from Eastern Europe and has a Russian accent, I've heard.
Yes, I've heard that too.
Originally you were going to do a session on Michael Paine and Oswald, and one on the TSBD clerical staff. But you got so engrossed into the Michael Paine Oswald relationship that you needed two sessions. So we're going to do this over the 2 days. You've got an hour each. So if you can try and work on 50 minutes, 45, 50, and then the balance for questions, that would be great for us. So please go ahead and share your screen if you've got a presentation.
Okay, now here I go to slideshow and I go from the beginning and I should get the full screen. Are you getting the full screen?
No, you need to click on the PowerPoint panel. You've probably got several applications running in the background. You've got to
Yes.
click on the one that obviously is a PowerPoint. Yeah, you have clicked share first, have you?
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, now do you see my presentation?
No.
Ah,
Yes, we do. We do. Now you've got to go to the slideshow view.
yeah, so I think this will do it. Did that do it?
Not yet.
It looks like there's a little bit of a delay.
Yep, we're there. We're there on the home
Okay.
page.
Okay, great.
And
Okay, should I kick it off?
yep, I think we're ready to go. Is that okay, folks? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so this is part one. I'll get into part two because I think it's always important to keep your audience hanging at the end of your presentation because, I want you to have a restless night sleeping about what else you're going to hear from me. So I still think Michael's an enigma. I spent many years working on Ruth Paine primarily and looking at Michael as kind of a side issue. And part of that is because he's such a low profile of what he presents to the world. So it's kind of interesting about him. About 10 years ago, um, uh, through working with David Lifton, who had done some extensive interviews with him in the 90s, uh, I started to develop a different concept. And then within the last couple of years, I met a gentleman who's sitting out there in the audience named Robert Mans. And in our discussions of the Paines and talking about Michael as a potential operative, etc., and Ruth, he said maybe it was the other way around. And he kind of blew my mind at that point in terms of starting to think about Lee and Michael's relationship if Lee was watching Michael for government reasons, and Michael was kind of an unwitting participant in this because he had such a desire to make some type of a political impact on the world himself. So I think that that's kind of how my journey happened in the last couple years. I always go back whenever I start to falter about how much time and money I spend on this over the decades. I could have a chateau in Italy, like some people do, and have many rooms there, etc. With all the money I've probably spent. But I always go back to my childhood journals of when I was quite young when this event happened. And this is a direct quote that you're seeing on the screen, what I call that horrid day. So Is everything okay? Am I being heard okay?
Yeah, heard and seen. It's all wonderful this time.
Okay. Uh, so very sad day. And this kind of, makes it very personalized, right? In terms of, my thinking about the teachers, thinking about my father, and from a child's perspective, what you kind of see in being exposed to an event like this. That was Friday. Now this is moved forward to Sunday. And of course we were a Catholic family, so we were all glued to this for the whole weekend. And on Sunday, when this happened with Oswald, this is just so seared in my memory of my father's reaction to this. A man who I simply adored and sought his approval every opportunity I had. He was just aghast. And he had been suspecting things all weekend long. He thought, it's not just this guy. It's not just this guy. And of course, I had no clue how he was determining this. But I love his very last thing. My dad says I can do it. My dad passed away in 1991, so I don't think he ever imagined I was still going to be on this trek. But that's life in the fast lane. But now here we are, 62 years later, and it's been almost 8,000 days since this thing happened. And the research has ebbed and flowed with the number of people actively involved in this and getting any type of press attention associated with it, over all those years. And what's kind of beautiful about this investigation is that keeps you going is that there's just so many different aspects of it. And while we get into such detail, and when you're trying to have a conversation with a lone nutter or a non-believer or a person that's just not anywhere near well versed in the topic, you can send them over the edge really fast with all of our details. But that's what we live on. That's what we thrive on. And it's what helps us put the whole puzzle together. Now we're at the point where we have an executive order for release of documents. Joe Backus is doing a great job of keeping us alerted about what's important and what's still missing and redacted, and what we can possibly expect, or manage our expectations so that we're not devastated when this whole process is over. But there's a lot of teasing going on there about the promise of new files. I personally haven't been a big fan of the hearings because I thought that they were pretty silly in the type of questions they were asking the researchers and the people there. And so I think that we'll have to just kind of wait and see where that goes. Today's discussion on the interactions of Michael Paine and Lee Oswald. I'm just going to talk briefly about a couple of key players in this masterpiece theater. Then we'll talk about where there's activities that they've had where there could have possibly been some form of interaction. And then it's important for us to understand what the areas of commonality were between the two men, and then understand where they were opposites and where those conflicts may have led to certain actions on their part, or will help us understand how events laid out, and why or why not we may believe that certain activities between these two men had any real meaning in terms of this assassination event. And then we're going to dig into compare the timelines of their lives. You're going to see slides that say Lee, Michael, Ruth, and what they were doing in those months and years for over that 10-year period, 52 to 62. And then we'll delve deeper into 1963, where activities heat up. The key players that I'm going to bring into this, and this obviously doesn't include everybody, but this is, something to keep us focused. So I put their dates of birth on here so that you could kind of see how people were of the same generation or not, right? And so you have Lee uh, born in 39, and Michael and Ruth just a couple years apart, but it put them quite a ways older than Lee, like they were like older brother, older sister type of relationship from an age perspective. Then I believe George and Jean de Mohrenschildt are extremely important in their lives. And then Everett Glover, who to me is a person of interest in not only this association, but I'm delving more into him now in the last year or so to understand him a little better. And then Larry Crawford. He is an interesting guy, and we need to think of him as a major lookalike and how that enters into some of the sightings of Michael or Lee with other people that we've come to know through this assassination research. George and Jean, just to refamiliarize ourselves with it, they met Lee in the fall of 62, and he had that enigmatic Colonel Lawrence Orlov with him. And that certainly seems like it was sanctioned, if not promoted, by the CIA operative in Dallas at the time. The next month, over the next 30 days, they begin being the little mother-father figure to the Oswalds, and are very concerned about them both financially and socially. George de Mohrenschildt often gets confused with George Buhi as a major influencer for Lee and Marina. Many times when I hear in discussions, George de Mohrenschildt did this, did that, etc. When you dig down into it, it was not that George. It was the other George. Lee was like a sponge in terms of picking up influence from the people that he associated with. And George and John were another couple that fell into that type of an arena with him. They wore out their welcome pretty quickly, the Oswalds, with the Russian community. And by December of 62, they were pretty ostracized by them and not in good favor, not being invited places, not having generosity of clothes and furniture and food falling at their doorsteps, etc. But George and John convinced Katya Ford, who is one of the most respected members of this community, to include the Oswalds in her holiday party. So they refamiliarized themselves with all of those people. And then in February of 63, coming into that final year, there's really an intensity around trying to expand the world of the Oswalds in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so they host a party for the Oswalds, and it's like no Russians need apply, right? It's the oil industry people, it's the social people that they know outside of that world that the de Mohrenschildts invite, and they get their first look at this couple and their young daughter. So they become now it's like their second homecoming into the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And also in February, George and John encourage Everett Glover to host a party and introduce the Oswalds to even more people. So right after that, in March through May, they start to see the Oswalds less frequently, although they do tap in on some key areas of interest, like the backyard photos, the visibility of the weapons that Oswald had, and some of his political leanings. But they are all caught up in their own legal entanglements. George is suing his ex-wife for the trust fund of his deceased child who had died of cystic fibrosis at an early age. And that's a very messy entanglement in Philadelphia. So they're having to go there and take care of that. And then his potential contract for Haiti is really starting to heat up, and they're able to spend a lot of time on that. Everett Glover, he's the same generation at the Mohrenschildts. They're within. He's about there's about 7 or 8 years age difference between them. He's American. He was born in Massachusetts, and he is a chemist at the Mobile Saccone Magnolia. So those three names of that oil company and research lab, they're kind of all intertwined. So when you're looking through your research and you see those names, they're pretty much all talking about the same place. He had met the De Mohrenschildts through ice skating. Ice skating was a big deal in Dallas. I mean, they had a beautiful skating rink, and many people. You'll be, David Ferry. I mean, everybody you hear, they loved to ice skate. Now, Ferry may not have ice skated on the particular day he said he did, but it's still it goes to show that there was a wide berth of people that were engaged in this social activity. And then up through 63, they were avid tennis players with Glover and others, Sam Ballin, other people in their social circle. Uh, he met Michael through the Unitarian Church choir, and they both loved to sing, and they formed a madrigal singing group, and so they spent a lot of time together. In 62, there was he separated from his wife, and at just about the same time that Michael separated from Ruth, and Michael relocated to Grand Prairie, away from the Irving Fifth Street address. And he had a house, and he had between December and January bringing in two fellow co-workers to be roommates with him and share the costs of the house. After meeting Lee, both Glover and his roommate Schmidt very much wanted Michael, who they both knew, to meet Lee. And that was a political motivation in terms of this man who had been to Russia, appeared to be, from everything he was saying, a mover and a shaker. We know for a fact that that was partly a facade, and partly outside fakery, and partly real. So, that's what we've spent years trying to peel back that onion and understand exactly what Lee was all about. When they moved to Haiti, having successfully secured a almost $300,000 contract there for consulting services, they stored many of their household items with him. So there was a close friendship there. Now, Larry is what he kind of goes by. There's all this mix up with his name because it's the A versus the O on Crafard. And even his children that he had after the assassination, one of them uses an A and three of them use an O. And so it was always a mixed bag. He claims it happened when he entered the army, and they misspelled it. They got it wrong, and so he just went along with it and changed, because that's just the kind of happy-go-lucky guy that he is. Again, a potential look-alike. This is a picture of him. Sometimes I look at it and it's like, who in their right mind would think that that looks like either of them? And then, surprisingly, one of the items that gets referenced a lot, and even in the Warren report documents, it says, well, he was a lookalike, and it must be true because Ruth Paine said he looked more like Lee Oswald than anyone else. It's like she never even met him, okay, that we know of. And so it's interesting to use that. Someone who merely would have been using it as looking at this photo A and photo B and saying, yes, those two do look alike. There's this fourth bullet point that I'm going to send out. I need help with, because I hear this cited all the time that he was supposedly an expert Marine sniper. Well, first of all, he was in the U.S. Army, not the Marines, and those are two very separate divisions. And it's when it's alluded to, it's referenced that Earl Warren and Gerald Ford were interviewing him as part of the testimony, and he said he was a sniper, and then they changed the topic and went to something else. Well, you can word search all over his testimony, which again is over 200 pages of probably second only to Ruth Paine in terms of the number of pages that they use to ask him questions. And I can't find anything anywhere that legitimacy about him being a Marine sniper and avowing that. So anybody that could help me, you got my email through DPUK, please reach out to me and help me with that, maybe in the Q&A. So I'm just a few sightings, and we have to be mindful of impersonation versus mistaken identity, because those speak to motive, and that's very important as we parse through this. But I've just listed a few of the areas here that we'll be talking about later to go over them, but this is not an all-inclusive list. For the interactions and overlaps of these two men, here's where we start to kind of lay out the plan here. It started in February of 63, where there was a party at the Mohrenschildts. It moved into Glover doing a party that expanded the circle of people getting to know the Oswald and Leap in particular, and where Ruth Paine enters the picture. April 2nd is where Michael enters the picture, because that's his initial meeting with the Oswalds. I throw in Mexico City. I wanted to look at Michael's activities during that time period to find out if there's any missing gaps of time that we can say, what was he doing? How did Lee get from point A to point B? And is there any way that possibly Michael may have assisted with that? Lee saw Michael at the Irving house on weekdays and weekends. We'll get into the very specifics about for a separated man, Michael Paine spent a heck of a lot of time back at his family home there on Fifth Street. But he took every opportunity to make sure that people knew he was not sleeping with Ruth, but he was trying to fulfill other husband and wife and father responsibilities there to the family. The ACLU meeting was another time where they interacted. They both had this strong interest in the right wing, and so whatever politics was happening in Dallas, Walker, the John Birch Society, those type of organizations they were involved in. The usual list of suspects here with the furniture mart, the barber shop, etc., and that this whole intriguing aspect of Michael talking to students at SMU about politics, and did he really talk about Oswald specifically to some of those students? The interactions with FBI agents, Oswald got exposed to a lot of different ones in New Orleans, and also in Dallas, Fort Worth. One man that I'll talk about on Sunday is Bardwell Odom, who becomes this interesting figure in the assassination research. He's everywhere, everything all at once. He would fit well into that movie. And they're calling him Bob. He kind of takes over where Hosty gets aced out by Shanklin after that assassination weekend and the evidence of the note and the associations with Oswald prior to the 22nd. There's talk about cars at the Beckley address, and the General Walker. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then even the Officer Tippit shooting, Michael's activities on the 22nd, and are there any overlaps there with Lee's? What were their common interests and personality characteristics? They both had some radar training in the military. They both served abroad. They were very interested in civil rights. And when I say these things about their interests or whatever, um, I am completely open to whether it was insincere or whether it's opposing atmosphere that they're involved in. Um, Both of them are extremely sensitive to the opinions of others, and they both experienced family upheaval through divorce at an early age. And it manifested itself in two very different ways, but also in very similar ways. So those are common characteristics that would have drawn them to each other. Um, they both have this strong tendency towards passive aggressive behavior, which manifests itself in a lot of different environments. Um, and they don't have close relationships with their siblings. Michael has one brother, a younger brother, um, and then they both had military level security clearances. So those are commonalities. But on the other side of the mirror, as we go into Alice in Wonderland area, we'll start to see where there just clashes everywhere you looked. Um, they uh, they have opinions about violence for political change, for example, that are very different. And Michael's influenced by his father, who he says he's always talking revolution, and then he hears this young guy who has traveled around the world and has been exposed to a lot of different environments, and is initially hoping to be impressed by this young fella and learn from him. Doesn't quite turn out that way. Observer versus proactive. Michael is very much the observer, but longs to be the participant. Lee is very much the proactive, and gets his hands into things that are way beyond him, not only in the terms of understanding but also his capability. They're opposite in terms of physical abuse. So and their respect for women is very different. Um, and so Michael has developed some secure male friendships outside of family, although there are a few cousins that he keeps in contact with. And part of the anchor for that is the annual trek to Ashorne Island, uh, back in the Cape, so that when you spend a few weeks there and you have a lot of close personal interactions, that helps to cement friendships and relationships. And Marina was zero political influence on Lee, whereas Ruth was a tremendous influence on Michael. And they both came from socioeconomic backgrounds that provided very different expectations of what they should achieve in life. Now we're going to dive into these year by year annually, and we're going to kind of sail through it. Uh, and I'd be happy to make this PowerPoint available to anyone if they want to pursue it, at their leisure later on. In 52, this is a setup you're going to see: Lee, Michael, and Ruth. And I put the ages up there for the first few years so you could kind of start to see um, Lee at 13 years old doesn't have quite so much going on in his life of adult consequence, but he has a lot going on in terms of his childhood development and forming his political thought. So he was the whole situation of moving to New York and living with the Picks there. There's one alleged altercation that happens there that is the tipping point of severing that relationship. and but there's a lot to understand about that situation. He had multiple family homes and apartments. He develops behavioral issues, spends time away from school. I mean, out of 47 days, he missed, 32, things like that. And so he actually undergoes a psychiatric assessment during this time period. And he supposedly got his first exposure to communism because this would have been around the time of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. Meanwhile, Michael, he's Paines and Forbes, the family that he came from, have high expectations for the descendants. And now this guy has flunked out of college, both Harvard and Swarthmore. He's working for this research foundation that's partly associated with Swarthmore, and he's working on nuclear research instrumentation. So he's always had this engineering bent. And if he heard about a problem that needed an engineering solution, he would immediately get to his own little drawing board and start to try to find out what he could do about that. And he joined the military. He was an intermediate speed radio operator and then later combat artillery. Ruth is almost midway through her college experience and she's thriving. She's went to a college that was very avant-garde. It was a combination of you learn here in the classroom, you learn some at home through your books, and then you learn with on-the-job training out there in the field that you are majoring in. So she was majoring in education. So therefore, she ended up in a lot of community centers, preschools, those, where she was exposed to the young children. But she also got inspired working with these immigrants of different nationalities, and that got her started into the language and the love of language that she always carried through her whole life, which was legitimate. But when she got burned so badly after the assassination, she did swing away from that quite dramatically, which make people think that it was a posing experience for her all along. But 10 years is a long time to pose. So she ends up going to Europe, and she visits a few countries, and she's interested in Friends. Friends is the name of the people that are of the Quaker faith, and she does some conference work there. The next year, everyone's a year older, still in New York City for Lee. Marguerite is working at hosiery shops and ladies' dress stores, etc. He starts at 8th grade, but the truancy is still there. His IQ was tested at this time, and he was tested at 118. Michael, he's still in the Army. He took photographs of his tour of duty, and those were later confiscated in the raid on the Friday and Saturday at the Paine house. And he justified his combat artillery work in the war at that time as a form of Christian crusade. So it's in the greater good. And so that's how he was able to meld the concept of nonviolence with serving his country. Now Ruth continues at Antioch, still loving it. Now she's moving into more elementary teacher type of roles, and she's still got the interest in the Quaker religion. Now Oswald and Marguerite return to New Orleans, and he finishes up 8th grade. Nothing stellar, a little bit of a cut up, but still progressing. As we start to go through more with Oswald now and the schools he's attended and the jobs that he had, we're going to get into that whole potential Harvey and Lee situation, where who was doing what and why and where and with whom. And I'm not going to veer off into that path. So if you see something on the slide and you go, well, I don't think you really work there or whatever, these are reference points that we'll be seeing that have a whole course of study by researchers that have delved into those areas much more strongly than I have. Michael is still in the Army, but he gets discharged in the spring. And he's hired doing what he called very boring work on these precision scales. So he's not interested in that at all. It's stifling his creativity. And he gets hired by his mother's fourth husband, Arthur Young, to make helicopter models on his property in Pennsylvania. Ruth is ebbing towards the end of her Antioch College education. She's still now even more involved with the Friends. She's expanding outside of just locally in Pennsylvania for neighboring states and also to uh, abroad for worldwide communication. Ruth Young, Michael's mother, was a great advocate of peace through communication. And so she was a strong supporter of the United Nations, etc., which tended to make her be viewed as a very liberal individual, uh, although she had a very conservative social bent. So she was kind of fiscally and socially conservative at the same time. Uh, John Hoke had married Ruth's sister Sylvia, and he was given a security clearance. He worked both John and Sylvia Hoke worked for the U.S. government. In next year in 55, still in NOLA, um, goes through a series of part-time work. He starts to overtly reach out to communist socialist organizations at this time. And this is where he would have had the opportunity, and he did, to join the Civil Air Patrol, something to give him some social networking and consciousness that he wasn't getting from his family. He was, interacting with the Murats at this time in New Orleans, and so he did have that expanded family experience. Michael, who's now in his mid 20s, he's kind of living a carefree and stress-free life there on the property of the Youngs, and he gets to kind of make his own hours and do his own thing. Working there, in June he takes time off and does this little road trip over in Europe with the Swarthmore Choir. Again, one of those areas, the singing that parade through his entire life. In July, he takes a pleasure trip to the Bahamas. And in late November, his biological father, Lyman Paine, travels to England, France, and Italy on a political mission in the sense that it was kind of a worldwide communism organization that he was involved in and had many contacts. And then at the end of the year, when he meets Ruth. Ruth is living in Philadelphia. She has a lofty goal of having a meaningful life that she can contribute to. She's still drawn to the Quakers, and she graduates from Antioch with a BS in education. She's still reaching out to the Young Friends group and attends their conferences where she interacts with people, and then of course meeting Michael. In 56 now, and you notice Michael and Ruth are just a year apart from each other. So he has these whole series of little part-time jobs that he does before they move to Fort Worth, and he starts the 10th grade, which he only stays in for a few weeks before he quits and joins the Marines and is sent to California for his boot camp. Michael is still living La Vida Loca, well, his version of it, in Pennsylvania, and he is conflicted about the family goals of and expectations that are kind of adamant, and then what he really wants, but he doesn't really know what he wants, so that makes it a little more challenging. Um, the um, and during this time period, Ruth kind of gets fed up with him at a certain point because uh, he's not, although he's good company and they get along well, she's not feeling the passion from him. And he actually says to her one day, I don't really love you, but maybe I can grow to love you over time. And she's like, forget it. Go out and find somebody to love. This is ridiculous. I don't want you if you don't love me. And so they end up breaking up for a year. And he goes off, and you will see that lo and behold, he didn't find someone else to love, because I'm not sure that's in his toolkit to be able to do that. Ruth continues living in Philadelphia. She is very influenced by Ruth Young and this whole idea of better world and communication. She's teaching now because she has a bachelor's degree. John Hoke, the brother-in-law of Ruth, is working at ICA and AID in Panama. And Sylvia is working at the U.S. Air Force in the personnel division. Her major at Antioch was in psychology. Um, in 57, Lee is in the Marine Corps, taking you through the places where he was stationed, see if there was any overlap between what Michael was doing. No, Michael was back in the States and no longer in military service. And he's still working with Arthur Young, enjoying that work immensely. Uh, his father and his second wife, Freddie Paine, uh, are now living in Los Angeles. And he had always been a very well-respected architect. Even when he started out in New York, he won awards and that. And so he's able to parlay that even many years later into a very fine career for himself. So in August, Michael comes crawling back and wants to resume dating, and she does. And then they marry in December. Uh, but an interesting little side note there is that when the Quaker elders come to interview them, and before the marriage, because they have to kind of put the blessing on it that you'll be able to come to the friends meeting and have your marriage officially enacted. He was petrified that they were going to ask him about how much he did or didn't love Ruth, and so uh, he said, but all he did was just look in the cupboards and the closets to see that we had enough space. So he was relieved that he didn't have to go through that whole psychological evaluation of his inability to really express a loving relationship. Ruth is finding practical ways to work on this world communication vision that she has. And then in February, her father, William Hyde, who's an insurance man of some note and respect, he applies to CLUSA, which is the Cooperative League USA. It's a nonprofit that has, the arm of the government reaching inside. And even though it's USA, it does connect worldwide. And he wants to uh, wind down his insurance career. He's getting older, and he wants to throw himself into that as his primary endeavor. And he also wants to include his wife Carol too. So now Ruth gets off the fence and finally, legitimately, formally joins the Quakers, and then of course their marriage. Uh, Michael was never a Quaker. He was Protestant and Unitarian from his upbringing. In 58, Lee is still in the Marine Corps. He's at various spots. He gets court-martialed twice for actions. And then we bring Larry Crawford into it. He's in the U.S. Army, and he's in Germany. So it doesn't look like there's opportunity for any overlap there between those two individuals. In 1958, after they were married, Michael and Ruth moved to this renovated barn apartment at the Young's property in Paoli, and he spends a year working there, now a little more formally. He's making helicopters and models, and experiments with aeronautical designs of his own making. uh, Arthur Young made a little documentary video of life on his property that shows some of the experimental aircraft that was being worked on there, and so you can understand why that was fascinating work for Michael to get associated with. And then Ruth is along with him, and she's starting to really get into a pen pal program, and she starts to write to this woman named Ella that we don't have any other information on. And she's trying to promote through the Quakers this east-west communication, and their plan is to bring three Russians over the United States. 59 is when Oswald gets his hardship discharge from the Marines, and then moves to the USSR. He tries to renounce his citizenship, and at this time, Larry is still in Germany, and is discharged this year and lands back in Michigan. In 59, and Larry is within a couple years of Lee. He's a couple years younger than Lee is. And Michael gets asked by Arthur Young to come to Texas to work at Bell Helicopter to set up a research lab there. So that's something like manna from heaven for him to be able to get to do that. This is when he meets Everett Glover through the Unitarian Church Choir, and he starts this association with him, and also he gets to enjoy the singing and that in the choir. In the summer, he visited his father out in Los Angeles. They buy the house once Ruth comes to relocate with him, because he went ahead. So tell me if this story sounds familiar. You have a pregnant wife who's very pregnant, and you decide to go off to another state and another city and go after your own work or your own desires. And then you leave it to her to pack everything up and move to Texas from Philadelphia. Kind of sounds like a little bit with Oswald in Dallas, New Orleans. They have their first child, and it's a girl. Let's see, how are we doing on time?
Okay. We've got about 10 minutes before we do a Q&A.
Okay, great. In 1960, Oswald moves to Minsk within the Soviet Union, and that's not really his own choosing. That's what they've designated for him, and he doesn't know it, but he has an undesirable discharge from his service now because of the defection. The Mohrenschildts take off for a walking tour. They haven't met the Oswalds yet. They're in two different countries at that time. Michael continues his work at Bell. He buys this little hot car, his little sports car. He's only 29, but he's kind of having his midlife crisis early. And he is totally enmeshed in his helicopter work. He really is enjoying with this research lab. He's meeting very intelligent and talented engineers that he's forging work relationships with. He still hears about his father and his political thought. And then Ruth is a homemaker in Irving. So you've got this dynamo, young, educated woman who loves social outreach and she's starting to be stuck at home raising a child, which she loves that aspect of it, but it's not as fulfilling for her as the full life that she wants to have. Um, Her father is tired of the mother, and so he gets her committed to a sanitarium on very dubious rationale. Um, Ruth starts some Russian language lessons from Dorothy Gravitas, who is the mother-in-law of Ilya Mamontov, who becomes the translator for Marina Oswald on that assassination weekend. To start to see how some interconnections in that Russian community start to come into the Paines. Um, and she's still doing the East-West communication mission that she's on. And then, of course, they both vote for JFK while they live in one of the most conservative right-wing uh, neighborhoods of Irving. 61, still in Minsk, radio factory, but things aren't quite so rosy in Russia. He's got money, but you can't buy that much there, so he's not real thrilled about it. So he starts to toy with the idea of coming back. He meets Marina, marries her, and that's kind of a rush situation that happens. For Michael and Ruth, he's still happily working. He's in choir practice, and he meets this man, this engineer, Frank Kristinic, who becomes a very close personal friend to him until he leaves the Dallas area. But there's the seams in the marriage are starting to come apart. His father visits, so you can see about at least once a year, and often twice, the summer and the holidays. At Christmas, George Lyman gets inserted into his son's life as an adult. And so Michael, who's now 30, has this opportunity to have a grown-up impression of his father and what that means for him. The Ruth is recognizing the marriage issues. She's dealing with her parents' divorce, and she continues her language lessons. In 62, she's living in Minsk. Lee is still in Minsk, and his daughter is born. So he wasn't able to get back to the U.S. For her to be born here, which is what he wanted. They come back. The State Department loans him money, and he has a manuscript that he's written about his life in Russia and how the cooperatives work, etc. and that. And he gets it typed up. The FBI shows an interest in him, of course. He meets the Mohrenschildts, and under the wing of that Russian community, they have this very infamous October 7th meeting of go find work in Dallas, because like Fort Worth is nowheresville. And so we will help you get a job. And out of that meeting, it's George Buhay and John Hall, who are members of that community, that both reach out very specifically to employers on his behalf. Not the only one that George de Mohrenschildt does is with Sam Ballin, his friend, who is in the oil well recording business. So we have this period of time. Here comes the post office boxes, right? That he starts to open and close these things for his mail delivery. But this period of October 8th to November 4th is what I call the mystery life. It's his residence is unknown except for 4 days that he was at the YMCA. And I would love to see what strong research has done over that specific period, because it's a big chunk of time, not that far before the assassination. But it's an area that I have not delved into myself. Marina's kind of passed around to the Russian immigrants who are treating her like a little living doll that they can dress and food and clothe and provide housing and food for, and and clutch their pearls about the situation that she is in, etc. He gets a job at Jagerschild Stovall and takes great advantage of everything they have to offer in terms of he made business cards for George de Mohrenschildt. He faked identifications. He did photography work of his own there, and then worked and got overtime pay. So kind of an interesting situation there. Gary Taylor, who is the son-in-law of George de Mohrenschildt, actually helps him with some of the relocation to get him into Dallas, so that he can supposedly have a better life there. In December, when Robert wrote to his brother Robert, and he said he was apologizing for not writing sooner, and said, "I was out of town for a few days, and I know nothing about him being out of town for a few days at that time and what would have transpired during that." Uh, and then that Cut-Ya-Ford party happens in that time. Ruth and Michael, they separate. Okay, it's the marriage is ripping apart, and he starts coming to the house quite frequently. Every Friday he shows up with a support check for her and the children, and he dines there a lot, etc. And so he's now stepping out a little bit more into the political arena. Um, and Ruth is still dying for more social interaction and contact. And she and Michael are still going to movies together. They're going to the ballet. They're singing together. They're going to folk dances, etc. And that interesting separation. Now we're coming into 1963. So we can do this if we're at the end of the time, or we can do a couple months now, and then I can pick it up tomorrow. What do you think, Neil?
I don't know. I'm thinking, what are other people thinking? Yeah. Are there questions on this at any point at the moment? No. Well, why don't you just do? What would you
Okay,
prefer to do? I mean, you could do the first 2 or 3 months if you want, or
okay, yeah, let's do that.
all right. Let's
Okay,
do the first
I
quarter then. Yeah.
yeah, I don't want to run into the next person's time. I want to be mindful of that. So you just tell me what month. That's enough, Nancy. Well,
Uh,
you could probably say it. You could probably say it nicer than that, but
well, what? Look, we're due to. When are we due? 5 minutes. We're due to start.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, great.
So yeah, go for about 5 minutes.
Okay, so January, we see he's still working at JCS. He's repaying the State Department through dubious means, right? Because his salary is meager. He's spending like a wild man on magazines and that type of thing for his political junkie fix that he needs. And but he's still relying on the assistance of other people. And he starts this typing class that gets him out of the house in the evenings a couple times a week. There's 3 classes scheduled a week, but he has very erratic attendance. So he's trying to uh, develop this skill so that he can continue to go down the path of writing some type of memoirs. And they are and he's socializing with George de Mohrenschildt a lot during this time period. In January, in for Ruth and Michael, they have these monthly Bell dinner, and that's where uh, someone at Bell would host 2 or 3 other couples at their home. And so you'll find that this is where Ruth has this 1963 calendar. I can't find anywhere where they ever asked her, "Do you have a 1962 calendar?" Because I would have loved to have seen that, where she kept this information. And they call it a diary, but it's one of those little tiny Hallmark things that you used to get for free in the Hallmark card stores. Uh, and it really wasn't that much space to write much in there. And she kind of muddied the water because after the assassination, she went back and wrote some things in there like day, Lee bought rifle. And so then it raised the question, did you know about that then? Or did you put that in afterwards? So it's the document and the provenance of some of the entries in it have some suspicion around them because of that. So Michael is having dinner in Irving a couple times a week. He has at least one weekly dinner with the Christenics, Frank and Charlotte Christenic, which he's have kind of adopted him as a brother during the separation period, and he's doing his choir practice. In February, they're on Elsbeth. He's still doing the typing, and this is where the Glover meeting with the Mohrenschildts happens in February, and then he meets Ruth Paine at the Glover party, and now this is a whole new group of people for him to impress, and impress them he tries to do. And he's having Marina start to contact the embassy of, it, I'm not sure we're both going back, but at least you're going to go back to Russia. So he's trying to get her out of the picture of his life at that point. And he's doing very overt outreach to the Communist Party in New York City. Ruth and Michael are kind of continuing on. Ruth is continuing her Russian language classes, and she is reaching out to St. Mark's in Dallas for a teaching position for the Russian language for the summer. So she's starting to try to lay the groundwork for that. She's not pleased with her marital situation. She wants more, and she is starting to think of whether she should take some action or not. Immediately after meeting Lee and Marina, she's not that impressed with Lee. She spent most of the evening with Marina, and she writes to her family and friends about Marina, about this new woman that she has met, and how fascinating she is, and what a life she's had, and how much fun it is to talk Russian to her, etc. Okay, in March, we'll use this as our last touch point today. They moved to Neely Street, and we all know Neely because of the backyard photos with the weapons. He finally gives up on the typing. He had been going less and less, and this is the month that the weapons, the alleged weapons, are ordered and allegedly received. I'll put allegedly on all of those activities around the weapons. A seeming reconnaissance on the Walker property. General Walker seems to begin around this time, and he still wants to off Marina to the USSR. Michael and Ruth, Michael's life is pretty much the same. Ruth, though, is just filled with this opportunity that she has with Marina dropping into her lap. And they start to have visits with the children along, and they have correspondence. And the way they plan these get-togethers, you'd think it was a CIA mission or something, down to the details about time, place, and when they'll meet and what they'll do, etc. And she's very worried about Marina's situation and what this, she knows her own situation, and she has the social and economic means to stay afloat and take care of herself and go forward. And she sees all of those things lacking with Marina, and so she's trying to figure out how she can help that. Okay, so I think that's a good stopping point.
Okay, that's incredible background information. Did you interviewed Ruth and Michael, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, and over what period of time? When? How many interviews?
I
And
first interviewed Ruth in 1998, and then over the course of the 2000s, I interviewed her three more times. And then we've had some correspondence. And then when I was writing the typewriter article for the Echo, I reached out to her because she's not that far from me. She's about a 2 hour drive or so from me here in California. And I wrote her a letter with a bunch of questions, and she called me like 2 days later and said, I'd love to talk to you about this. This is a fascinating subject and blah, blah, typical of how she responds, how she has responded to me in the past of that, you have every impression that she wants to be very forthcoming and all of that. And then, of course, then you go down the rabbit's hole with certain things, and then the door gets shut when you ask some questions that she doesn't want to go and pursue. But it was interesting because she still has a pretty good memory of things. And although she didn't remember me from years back, which is fine, uh, and that.
And what was Michael's state of mind? When you,
Michael, I did work with Michael with David Lifton, and that was a few years before I had interviewed Ruth. And the Michael there's one incident that David talks about with Michael. Michael's very emotional. You don't get it when you see that interview with him over the assassination weekend, and he's sitting on the couch, and his famous living room lamp is right there next to him, and he sits there very stoically with a stiff upper lip and a straight physique, sitting on the couch, and talks very monotonely about extremely important events and situations around Lee Harvey Oswald. But he's actually very emotional. And he described the, I was not in the room when it happened, but it was tape recorded, so therefore I was able to hear it. Um, he talked about on Saturday being taken to the DPD, and this is when the incident happened with Wolf Fritz, where he slapped him. And he slapped him because they wanted Michael to go in and visit Lee in the jail cell, and they wanted him to wear a wire, and so he refused to do that. And Fritz just hauled off and put his the back of his hand and smacked him across the face. Now, from an upper class upbringing in Philadelphia as one of the Boston Brahmin families. That was completely not anything he would have ever been prepared for or thought could happen to him. Uh, and when he was revealing this about it, it was still such an emotional, retching experience. He cried uh, about it. And when on the day of the assassination, when Frank Kristinek and Michael were listening at Bell to the radio, and it finally came out with he's dead, JFK is dead. He describes that Michael broke down and cried. So there's some instances of this, which is very interesting about the guy's personality.
yeah, fascinating. Well, I think there'll probably be a lot more questions tomorrow when you finish the session. But I
Okay.
think we should just stop it now. But that was very, very interesting background stuff on the three parallels. Thanks, Nancy.
Okay. Let's see.
Just one other thing, actually. Nancy wrote us a very nice letter, which I've pinned on the board up there by the
Let's see. How do I?
FPC
Am I still?
FPCC.
Am
Yeah,
I still sharing?
you are. Yes, you are
How
still.
do I get out of that?
You got to press the X stop share button. It should be red, I think. But I could technically do it, but whether I can actually do it, where? Top left, top right.
Oh, okay. I think I got it.
Okay, you got it. Okay. Right. Okay. All right. That was it, Nancy. There was nothing else you wanted to say, was it?
No, that's it. That's it.
Okay, great. Well, we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Have some sleep.
Okay, what were you talking about the FPCC?
No, I was just saying,
Oh,
no, the nice letter that you sent me to the society, I've posted it on the wall near an
oh,
FPCC flyer and a model of the TSBD and a diagram of the dealing plot. So we've
oh,
got loads of artifacts here,
oh,
Nancy.
great.
We've got
Okay,
a bust of Kennedy. Um, we've got a reproduction Kennedy rocking chair. Let me just see if I can get the whole room again. Just bear with. There we go. So right at the back end, we've got books. We've got the Warren Commission volumes. We've got the HSCA volumes.
okay.
We've got two Zapruder cameras. We've got five Tippett murder board games. We've got lots of stuff here.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
very interesting. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording because I'll have to probably edit that thing out. But
Okay.
and
Okay.
look forward to speaking to you tomorrow. And those of you that are on virtual, we're probably starting about 5 minutes. We're just obviously running late, but the rest of the sessions are in person here, so that's not such a problem. Okay, bye.
Okay. Bye bye.